You're listening to the Whole Hog Sports Podcast. And now, here's your host, Matt Jones.
Happy Thursday, everyone. This is Ethan Westerman filling in as host today, and on today's show, we'll talk about the Arkansas basketball team's successful road trip with a pair of blowout wins at Mississippi State and LSU. It's the first time in program history that the Razorbacks have gone on the road and beaten SEC teams in back-to-back games by at least 20 points. Anthony Kristensen's in the studio with me, and we'll dive into what went right for the Razorbacks in those games. But first, a word for Brody's Barbecue.
I'm William Clark Green. Been chasing songs all over this great country for years now. It's been a blast, but the road will wear you out. Good food makes it better. Rudy's is the go-to for me and the crew. No frills, just real Texas barbecue done right. Brisket, ribs, cream corn, that famous sauce. It's like a little piece of home when you're nowhere near it. Don't get me started on those breakfast tacos. Served till 10 a.m., which is perfect if you're living on musician time. Find a Rudy's at rudys.com. Who knows, you might just bump into me in line.
Welcome back in. Like I said, we've got Anthony Kristensen in the studio today. The Razorbacks lived life on the road with a few flights sprinkled in between the past week. You lived life on the road with no such thing.
In the car.
Yeah, you got to be in both Starkville and Baton Rouge within a matter of a few days, and your method of transportation was car and highway.
Oh, yeah.
We're glad to have you back in Fayetteville, Anthony.
I'm tired.
I'm sure.
No, I mean, obviously Hank and Matt Byrne were there with us, or with me. We took shifts driving. I did not sleep well on the road at all. Like not just like I didn't sleep in the car at all, but like in the hotels, like I did not get a full night of sleep once. I woke up at least once every night. It was tough. But you know what? We made it.
Most interesting moment that happened on in this trip. What's the most? It could be Starkville or Baton Rouge. Any interesting, surprising, bizarre things? I feel like something always comes out of these.
I don't know that there's anything like super I didn't get to see Mike the Tiger, which is a little disappointing. But I mean, watching the Super Bowl at like a semi-empty Buffalo Wild Wings in Columbus, Mississippi was.
I was
kind of interesting.
I was hoping you were about to say you watched it from like a Fairfield Inn in like middle of nowhere, Mississippi or something.
No. We stayed at a Comfort Inn in Mississippi, and then a Holiday Inn in Louisiana, and both decent hotels. No complaints. Certainly stayed in some worse ones in the past, looking back at it. But yeah, no complaints. It was just not the typical Super Bowl viewing experience. But you know what? Hey, I'm a St. Louis guy. The Patriots lost. Let's go.
It's funny because you're talking about all this and it sounds miserable to me, but I'm glad.
I love being on the road.
I'm glad y'all have a great time.
Yeah,
with
it. I mean, hey, like I view the travel aspect of this job as one of my favorite parts of it. I like getting out and seeing different parts of the country that I otherwise probably wouldn't. Like, if I wasn't a college basketball reporter, would I ever go to Starkville, Mississippi? Probably not. Would I ever go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Probably not. I mean, would I have ever gone to Providence if I hadn't gone to the NCAA tournament and wearing my little T-shirt? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I have fun with it. I like experiencing different places. So.
Well, sorry you didn't get to see Mike the Tiger. When I went down there for the football game earlier this year, that was really cool.
I need to see the Tiger. I want to pet him.
So
that would be a bad idea.
Pivoting to the team, Arkansas obviously had a disappointing loss to Kentucky. I'm not going to say Kentucky's playing well right now. Put the Vanderbilt game aside, but a disappointing loss to them considering you had a packed house. Obviously some emotions involved in that game. Just didn't play very well. I mean, got kind of out physicaled. But then they had a week off.
You look at that game too. I mean, if they had won that game, they'd be on a 7-game winning streak.
Yeah.
Or
7.
Yes, 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
see, my mind, it's gone.
But they play that game. It's a disappointing game, and then they have a week off. Say what you want about the level of competition, at Mississippi State and LSU, but at least from those performances, it seems like maybe that week off after that disappointing game was maybe what the doctor ordered for the team.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like you said, it's probably the two worst teams they've got left on their schedule. So I guess that kind of came at the right time. But you're still on the road. You still have to, go and play and travel and all of that. And deal with everything that comes with it. And they're still, SEC level teams, right? I mean, they've, neither of those teams are going winless in the SEC. So, there's still a lot of challenges to that. And then to go and play as well as they did and, win as emphatically as they did, I was really impressed with the level of play, especially being shorthanded. Obviously, Carter Knox and DJ Wagner both out for both of those games. Oh, goodness, excuse me. That I thought was really impressive. And, the defense I thought was good, which isn't something that we've said a lot, over the course of this season. I think that's still a concern. But, holding, two conference opponents back-to-back to, fewer than 70 points, I thought was huge. I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's only the third time they've held a, top 100 team in the country to, fewer than 70 points this season. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about this trip on both ends of the ball. And, you get out of it, with the two wins that never really were in question. And, maybe you even come out of it with an extra piece to your rotation with Isaiah Sealy playing pretty well and, especially in the Mississippi State game. But I thought he had some nice moments against LSU as well. So, and now, I mean, obviously Carter Knox and DJ Wagner, whenever they return, how do you deal with that? What happens there? But, yeah, no, successful two-trip swing for Arkansas and a fun 5 days on the road for me.
Yeah. I think one of the questions that a lot of people ask with this team right now is like, how can they look so good in some games? Like, I mean, these past two games, like, led off with, like, the first time they've ever won back-to-back SEC road games by at least 20. You think about, the South Carolina game, obviously another team that's not doing well, South Carolina, but they looked really good in that game. And you think even about Vanderbilt, that is a team that's doing well, and they looked really good in that game. And then they have the games like Auburn. I know we'll get into Auburn later because they play them again this weekend where they look very bad. You go to the Georgia game where I know that they pieced together a comeback, put themselves in position to maybe win at the end, but too many bad periods in that game led to a loss. And then, Kentucky, they kind of just were flat. What do you think it is? Like, how can this team be so either dominant and good or just frankly not very good?
Well, I think sometimes it just kind of comes down to basketball's kind of a funny game. I mean, sometimes the shots are falling, sometimes they're not. And then other times, I think it does kind of come back to the defense, like we were saying earlier, which is why I think, those two performances over the past week were so big for them. Was, not just were they scoring at pretty much at will, but they also played really well defensively. And, John Calipari had said they were trying to do some different things with the defense. And yeah, I thought, that was pretty evident from those two games. So I think that's kind of the big thing with it. The physicality, they were out rebounded by LSU, which, LSU is a pretty okay rebounding team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And it felt like a lot of those
good offensive rebounding team, mediocre defense.
I about to say, it felt like a lot of those came off of this was such a terrible shot or like blowing a layup. They got a lot of like, okay, let's miss 3 layups in a row.
Yeah, there was like one possession. It felt like they missed 70 shots, and then the crowd started booing, and like I always feel bad for college kids when they get booed. Like I know everybody's obviously getting paid and everything now, but I mean they're still I don't know, they're still kids, I guess, but I say as some of them are my age, but it is what it is. But I don't know.
Malik Thomas and Darius Sakoff showed that they're still kids by playing rock paper scissors for who
see that was really fun. Yeah. I enjoyed that. That was a funny moment.
But to your point, it seemed like defensively they I mean even with the rebounding, the physicality stuff, like, blocking shots, et cetera, that went pretty well.
Yeah, no, I mean, the 10 blocks against LSU matched a season high. The last time they hit that mark was against Tennessee. Obviously, that was a big win for them. So, yeah, the defense I thought was really good. I mean, I think a lot of that was anchored by the front court. Obviously, like I said, you want the rebounding to be better, but, 10 blocks. I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. Trevin Brazile had 4 steals and 5 blocks against LSU. And, Mississippi State is known for that physicality and, has been, has had that identity since Chris Jans got there. And, Arkansas, just dominated the game from that perspective. So I think that's a big thing or a big deal, defensively to have those marks. And still you want the rebounding to be better, especially in that LSU game. But, like I said, LSU is a decent offensive rebounding team. Not the best, but defensively, I just thought it was a very productive trip, and yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes, because physicality was the word after the Tennessee game, or the Kentucky game after Kentucky just kind of dominated physicality. Sometimes I think people be like, oh no, there's a game, after this that's against a team that's known for being physical. I think sometimes that can be good for getting a team to maybe lock in practice, because that you're not about to face a team where you can afford to not be physical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that you've got that coming up with Auburn. I mean, obviously Auburn's not known for its physicality in the same sense that like Tennessee or Mississippi State is, but it's still a physical team that can hurt you inside and hurt you on the boards and all of that. I think we saw that when Arkansas went down to Neville Arena earlier this season. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think that does kind of help you lock in, and obviously you want to be at full strength, but the physicality is it's big. The SEC is a physical league. I mean, it's not as physical as the Big Ten by just kind of when you look at the games and stuff, but it's still a physical league. You need to be ready for that style of play and against a lot of teams. So yeah. Yep.
You mentioned it a little bit, but obviously Carter Knox knee, DJ Wagner ankle, few injuries that by all
Malik
accounts,
Ewan forehead.
Yeah, Malik Ewan now forehead. Things that by all accounts with how they talk about it, doesn't seem like a super long-term concern. It seems like they're just working to get him 100% maybe to get him back. But you had a smaller rotation for back-to-back games. Like we'll preface every single time talking about these two, the level of competition against Mississippi State and LSU is not they're not some of the better SEC teams. Yeah. But, I mean, in those games with the smaller rotation, Arkansas looked really good. What do you think they do when those players are back? Like, how do you manage a rotation? Do you want to throw off that a smaller rotations looked well? How do you ease the guys in? I guess, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think, I don't think you just, throw them in and just say, yep, good luck. I think you probably ease them back in, especially in practice. And, we don't know just how serious the injuries are, because it's just not something that we're privy to, but it doesn't sound like it's some devastating season-ending injuries or anything like that. So as for how you balance that, obviously the rotations were really good against Mississippi State and LSU, and they got to try a couple of different things as well. They did the 3 big lineup for a little bit against Mississippi State. They went small against LSU, and that didn't really work very well for the few minutes that was the case. LSU went on a 6-0 run, and Arkansas was 0-5 from the field. So maybe they, turn away from some small ball for a little bit. But yeah, I think getting those guys back, it gets you into a more solidified rotation, if that makes sense. You don't have to rely on things that you've only seen in practice or only are throwing together and trying in games that you're up by 400 points in. It gives you, I guess more of a known quantity, and like I said, I don't necessarily think that you just, throw those guys back in there as soon as you're comfortable with it. I think you ease them back in, but I think the biggest question is, where do you, did Isaiah Sealy, earn, more run, from those 2 games? And I think it'll be interesting to see what the answer to that question is, because like I said earlier, I think he was really good against Mississippi State. Didn't have quite the game against LSU, excuse me, but I still thought he had a couple of bright moments. So I think if nothing else, it shows that if you're in a position where you've got guys who go down, or guys who get in foul trouble, you can, if nothing else, rely on him to go in and give you some solid minutes. But yeah, I think from that perspective, I think it just gives you, a more solid rotation where you're not having to, do things that you haven't necessarily done throughout the rest of the season.
I want to tell you about our friends at Bentonville Glass. Serving its community since 1971, Bentonville Glass is committed, professional, and versatile. Looking for a quality leader in Northwest Arkansas? Looking for skilled craftsmanship? Choose Bentonville Glass for all your glass market needs with the highest quality products. You can come by and see them today at 507 South Main in Bentonville, or online at bentonvilleglass.com. Sticking with the rotation, you brought him up a second ago. Isaiah Sealy, had that pretty solid game against Mississippi State, and then he played against LSU. And, you alluded to it. I think at bare minimum now we know he's not a liability. he can maybe even help the team. But we know that he can be on the court in these situations. Another guy who I thought maybe benefited from the smaller rotation, we talked about, we'll get into Trevin Brazil a little bit more and some others, but Billy Richmond, it feels like for him, my question was with the smaller rotation, with the way that Billy Richmond plays, can he, stay on the court because he's not getting in foul trouble? Can he maybe tame it a little bit and be selective with, some of the aggressive play that he does? I felt like he was very important in these games. He didn't have like the flashiest stat line of all time, but he was really solid and affected things. I think maybe him being on the court more too, maybe it helped him get in a rhythm. I guess, what are your thoughts on how Billy Richmond played against Mississippi State and LSU?
Yeah, I thought he was really good in both games. Obviously, you think about Billy Richmond, even when he was coming out of high school, you think about his defense and just to kind of, all of those effort plays that he has. And, I think you saw that, especially in those two games, I think everybody's kind of talked and written about it at this point, just, how much he's expanded his offensive game and how much, he's grown there. He's not the most reliable 3-point shooter, but, it's something that he can do now. And, obviously he's, a top level athlete who can get to the rim, and, he's a lob threat, and he's a ball handler as well. I mean, he's been used as a backup point guard in the past. So, but with him in these games, I thought he was really good. It's now it kind of becomes a question: do you leave him in the starting lineup and let him bring that energy early before bringing Carter Knox into the game, or do you like bringing him off the bench so you get that effort play against maybe more tired bodies? That's the question for, I guess, them to answer. But I thought he was really good. I thought he was effective. He didn't get into any foul trouble. I mean, he got, I think, 3 fouls against Mississippi State, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe a minor foul trouble. But yeah, I thought he was really good. I thought he was really effective on the defensive end. And yeah, and obviously, it kind of comes with the caveat of it being Mississippi State and LSU. Sure, but it's like I said earlier, it's still 2 road SEC games that you go in and you play as well as you did. And yeah, I think he's a big part of, the success that they had, especially on the defensive end for sure. So, does he, how much did he benefit? I thought he benefited a lot. I think it gave him the opportunity to get more extended run. Not that he, has struggled for playing time by any means, but yeah, I mean, he's played 57% of minutes this season. And, I think he definitely benefited from it for sure.
It's funny because I feel like in almost all of these Arkansas wins, like you can make a case at the end of the game of like, like Darius Acuff is the player of the game just because he's gonna get his points. He's such a good player. Mm-hmm. But in the LSU game, I thought it was actually pretty clear. Darius Acuff led him in scoring and everything, but Trevin Brazil was I thought just kind of clearly the player of the game because of what he brought from rebounding. And then, he had his blocked shots, but if there was a stat kept for just shots altered just from like him being there, I would have been curious to see that. He gets a double-double, and he just affected the game in so many ways. And John Calipari says afterward that Trevin Brazil's a guy that he needs to play a lot of minutes. And even I think went as far to say that Trevin Brazil, gets mad getting taken out, like he wants to be out there. What are your thoughts on maybe Trevin Brazil's usage moving forward and what he's done to because I think he's a player that we've said it over and over that he can be the X factor for this team on how they look, how they perform. He has hit some lulls along the way, but he's coming off of one of his better games of the year.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned the shot altering. That's something Matt McMahon mentioned after the game, just like beyond the 5 blocks. He altered just a ton of stuff as well. So he was, like you said, I thought he was exceptional in that game. 14 points, 12 rebounds, 5 blocks, 4 steals, just really doing everything. I believe he had an assist as well. So he was everywhere. So yeah, and to that point, you mentioned it throughout the season. He's been a huge part of most of all the success Arkansas has had. He. Looking back, like the Texas Tech game, for example, a double-double in that game, and just how important he was to that, and with how well that win has aged to this point. So with his usage, like you said, John Calipari said, he's a guy who, is probably going to need to play a lot of minutes. He wants to play a lot of minutes, doesn't like getting taken out of the game, which I think those are qualities you want, especially in a guy like him, who he's going through his his last little bit of college basketball, just about a month left in the regular season before the SEC tournament and obviously the NCAA tournament beyond that. So, his usage, I could see it, going up for sure. I think, he's a guy who's played about 70% of the minutes so far this season, and that's with a game missed as well. So he's just been, he's been really good. He's a 3-point threat. Shoots about 37% from 3 and about 65% from 2. I think he's effective off the dribble. I mean, he's not the quickest dribbler by any means, and some of that is because he's a bigger guy, a taller guy. So he's not going to be as quick as Darius Acuff or Malik Thomas, but I think he's good off the dribble. He doesn't have a ton of turnovers, especially for a big guy who handles the ball as much as he does. I could see his usage going up, and I think that's something, especially when he's playing as well as he did against LSU. I think that's something that's going to be a big benefit for Arkansas going down the line. It's
funny we talk about this with him not wanting to get taken out of the game, and Calipari saying he needs to maybe be one of the guys that with the short rotation plays near 40 minutes. It's funny because last year, I think it was Providence, might have been Nashville. I remember I was at one of the games, and they have open locker rooms there. And I just asked Trevin Brazile, because obviously last year he had a strong end of the season. It was kind of, maybe what propelled him into this offseason, et cetera. The success that he's having was the end of last year. I remember asking him, I was like, what changed? And he said, I'm playing now. It was simple. He made it that simple. I'm on the court more. And you can just get the sense from him that, at least in that moment I did, that he's a guy that he truly does, he wants the bigger moments. He wants to be out there. I think that, if you're going to take one maybe positive, the biggest positive that's happened player development-wise since Calipari's been here, I would say Trevin Brazile is pretty clearly, I'd say, the biggest example of he's just made a huge jump from whenever Calipari first got here to now, and kind of what he means to this team.
Yeah, this gives me an opportunity to plug what I wrote yesterday in the car, because I wrote a little bit about that. I mean, when John Calipari first arrived on campus, he said that he had talked to Trevin Brazile, and he's like, "You're better than I thought." And he said, and then Trevin Brazile responded, "I told you," or something like that. Yeah. And you saw that development down the stretch last season, especially he had the big game at Vanderbilt, and winning that game. It didn't lock up an NCAA tournament appearance by any means, but it certainly made it a lot more likely than not. And looking back at that development and seeing where he is now, I think that's. Yeah, it speaks to him, his ability to be coached, which is something that's big for any player who wants to get up and play at the next level. And I think it's a credit to the coaching staff as well that he's developed as much as he has and become as important of a player as he is become for them this season. And I think that's it's a credit to everybody involved, and obviously you saw that against LSU. You've seen that against Texas Tech, against a lot of other teams this season. Whether he's the best player on the floor or he's a supplemental piece, he's been effective in whatever his role in any given game has been, and I think that's a big part of Arkansas's success so far this season.
Let's touch on Auburn real quick before we get out of here. They coming up this Saturday. It's one of the 3, home and home games that they have in the regular season. Obviously, the last time they went down there, it did not go well. A lot has to go different this time around if they want a different result, because there weren't a whole lot of positives you could point to from that game. It was Calipari's annual burn the tape game. We've now seen that 2 years in a row. It was South Carolina the year before, whenever he's like, burn the tape. This isn't my team, yada, yada. I think we now know that you'll get a burn the tape at least once a year. But, I still think, even if it wasn't a game where Arkansas, I think you could make the argument Arkansas maybe played its worst and Auburn played to its best, to where you got a culmination of it all. Mm-hmm. But even in a game like that, though, I think there's probably some things you can take from it that you're like, that has to go different than last time. What are some of those things that you're looking, when you look back to that game at Neville Arena, that just has to be different for Arkansas if they want a chance to win this one on Saturday? Yeah,
I think the first thing that you look at is, I think, the physicality. Like we mentioned earlier, I think Arkansas, it got out rebounded pretty handily. I don't remember the exact figures, but the paint points were pretty lopsided, if I'm not mistaken, and there was a lot that just kind of, everything kind of went wrong in that game, right? It just wasn't it was not a pretty game if you're looking at it from Arkansas's perspective. Carter Knox went down in that game with a hip injury, and fortunately for him and for Arkansas, it wasn't anything super serious. He played in the next game against South Carolina. But yeah, I think there's just a ton of different areas they needed to be better. I mean, Keyshawn Hall, he went into that game and he dropped 32 points and was really efficient, had 5 assists, and he's a guy who's going to be top of the scouting report again, just because of how well he's played this season. Auburn's on a 3-game losing streak, but in that stretch, he's scored 21, 24, 13. Bad game against Vanderbilt for his standards, went 0 of 2 from 2-point range and 3 of 5 from 3. But he's still a guy who can hurt you in a lot of different ways. And Auburn, kind of like it was in the reverse fixture, is kind of desperate for a result. 3 games lost in a row: Tennessee, Alabama, Vanderbilt. Obviously, three teams that are good. There's no shame in losing to those teams, but Auburn needs a result. Auburn needs a win. So, and it's they had lost 3 of 4 going into the game down at Neville Arena. So it's kind of a similar position for Auburn to be coming up and playing against Arkansas. It's in a desperation mode, I guess, if you will, and it needs a win. So I think you need to, I guess, take those lessons and make sure that you're ready for a team that is as desperate as Auburn is going to be. And yeah, just be ready, I guess. And sometimes it's just you catch a team on the wrong day, and I think that's kind of what happened for Arkansas, against Auburn. And maybe that's a lesson learned, and they're ready for it. But yeah, I think they'll certainly need to be, just because Auburn again is coming into this game in kind of a desperate need of a win.
Well, we'll be back with another show tomorrow to preview the Auburn game, but until then, you can read all of our coverage online at wholehogsports.com. Have a great day, everyone.